G'day everyone, it's James Davis, Director of Academy for Pax8 down here in APAC, and I've got Elliot joining me again, one of our fantastic SEs leading the charge with cybersecurity. He's a bit of a guru, and excited to have you back, Elliot. How you going?
Yeah, pretty good, James. Excited just to come off the back of these cybersecurity launches that we had with Adelaide and Perth, finishing off our last piece of the legs around Australia. We had some really good engagement from a lot of the partners through there. So really excited to see everyone sort of pumped around cybersecurity. I know it's a daunting task in many cases and a daunting topic in general. So it's good to see there's a lot of interest on that side.
I'm getting to see a whole bunch of partners again. What are your takeaways? What are some of the wins that people have got, and what are
Um,
people still struggling with?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of there's a lot of noise out there, particularly around vendors offering different solutions. There's a lot of ambiguity around what is an EDR, what is a backup, and what I need to have. So I think that's where we can do a better job on sort of providing a little more, bit of more direction and potentially using things like frameworks to understand what we actually need to deliver as part of cybersecurity stack. Partners know that they need it for the most part. They just, in many cases, don't know where to start.
So many choices, isn't there? I'm getting the same sort of feedback. Most people, I think, have hit that point. Have had so much time to learn and realize the implications of cybersecurity and the opportunities, and now a lot of people are going asking us, especially, where do I start? Where do I get started? And this brings me to our topic today, and throw out a question there is, where do we get started with building our security stack, and is stack even the right mindset and terminology for this? Maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think most of the MSPs I speak to are already doing some elements of security today, right? Whether that's simple things like patch management, which is security 101, some sort of backup solution, some sort of endpoint protection solution. So I think the partners already got a baseline practice in place, right? Password management, MFA, all of those components sort of start to settle in on the baselines that they should be looking at delivering. In many cases, they just need more structure and process around how that all fits together and have a better story on how to deliver that to their clients, explain what they need to be doing. That's why things like frameworks, right, really help with that. The Essential Eight, a lot of Australian and even New Zealand partners are using the Essential Eight as their guideline to sort of create those baselines. But there are challenges in there as well. The Essential Eight is a baseline practice, and there's a lot more we could and should be doing, right? And that's where other frameworks might come into the fray as part of guidance into those next steps. What I generally recommend, and we talked about this on the roadshows as well, is for partners to start somewhere, right? Do what they have or use what they have today, put that into some sort of cybersecurity strategy, right? And use that as their stepping stone into the next stage, right? Because if they linger on that and wait and try to build out this massively robust security strategy, it's going to take them months, if not years, to sort of put that all together. And bad actors aren't going to wait around for that. So one of the discussion points that came up during the roadshows was, all right, where do I start? And that's where use all those fundamental things that you have today to create your baseline, and then expand on that as time persists. But also leverage the wealth of information that's out there, right? Don't try to go it alone, right? There are industry experts out there that offer a wealth of information. Myself, we're always happy to sort of engage in those type of conversation with partners and sort of help them get to that next evolution in their security journey.
That's a really interesting point about the baseline. Like, we, as MSPs especially, we've always spoken around how we've done a lot of security practices in the past, and one of the things I'm excited to see in terms of the industry moving, and a win for me, is we're not calling ourselves security experts anymore. We've gotten past that we don't know what we don't know stage, and we can see the wide world of cybersecurity. And one of the things we spoke about with a lot of partners is the need to scope our current services and start building that consistent package across our clients. There's a lot of what you mentioned there. You know, some clients might have a password manager, some clients might have MFA, but it's not all clients have all this baseline standards applied. And so, like you said, it's a really good place to start, and there's a lot of money to be made just from doing that. Uplift through projects, get some, use it as a way to reframe your package and do an uplift to your current services if you're undercharging as well, or potentially wrap up a new package and have those services and just make them more prominent to show that your value prop is changing from the old school ways of fixing what's broken. So just to play a theoretical thing for you, Elliot, and ask you a question. Let's just assume I've done that. I've done that good baseline stuff. I've updated my contracts. I've got consistent coverage across my clients. What would be the next step? What would I be looking at building in my security solution?
Yeah, there's so many places you go to from from those key aspects that we looked at from a security baseline. But if I was to begin my security journey, I would really focus on preventative measures. Look at focus on items that are going to prevent an incident from a threat from actually taking place in the first place. If we look at things like backup as an example, those are the last piece of the puzzle usually, right? You don't use backup until all else fails. So, that is for a long time that's been used as my backup to things like ransomware, right? My protection against ransomware. That's not a good methodology, as we've seen with some of the new threats that have occurred over the last 18 months to 24 months. That doesn't prevent against extortion attacks. That doesn't prevent against breaches and loss of data, because you were just recovering that data and recovering from those type of incidents. So I think for partners, where they should be focusing on is things I can do to actually prevent those attacks from occurring. So that would lead down to simple things like understanding what your assets are, right? So if I use the CIS controls as a framework that we talk a lot about here at Pax8, one of the first two steps that they do is identify your assets, your applications, your software, your hardware assets, right? Understand the value of them, and then you can drive yourself forward from there, and that'll help to identify what sort of strategy you need to put in place once you understand the value of the data, the infrastructure you're trying to protect. Then it moves into more those preventative items. Once you've identified those pieces, which is, where does the biggest risk lie, right? And where can I sort of overcome those biggest risks, right? They're going to be key things, simple things like enforcing MFA, adding a password manager to make sure, and not just putting in a password manager, but enforcing good password policies and hygiene. There's no point having a password manager out there with every single application that you have having still the same password, right? So being able to randomize those periodically as well. A lot of that comes down to changing the culture, culture of the users, because a lot of them don't know what they don't know, much like, MSPs, who are new to the security landscape. We need to be those leaders in that space and help coach and make sure that users know what they should be looking out for to identify those threats.
And that last point you made around the enabling the end user, I found when you were presenting that at the roadshow, sparked a lot of thoughts for people around the opportunity there. We've been a lot of MSPs, especially, are struggling with the value prop and the commoditization, and that tight knit relationship that we built our business off the back of is sort of disappearing because we're not getting the huge amount of phone calls to our help desk all the time, and we're not having as much interaction with the wider user base as what we probably would have in the past. And that opportunity to do instructor-led security awareness training and properly enabling people when we are rolling things out like password managers and stuff is not something I'm noticing a whole lot of people doing. Have you seen many people doing that well, or is the industry as a whole doing it? Like, where do you think that sits?
Yeah, unfortunately not. A lot of the partners I speak to who who identify that security awareness training or something like that is important. Um, in their minds, a lot of the time, they're just grabbing a tool, creating a baseline type of training plan and a type of phishing campaign if that exists within the tool set they have access to. But they're not following up and they're not really identifying whether the users are taking that aboard. Right. In many cases, a lot of the training videos they go through are things you can just click through, you can make up, you can hopefully select the right multiple choice question at the end of it and pass. But is that effective? In many cases, we've seen that's not right. If I was to run a phishing campaign for a bunch of users who've gone through training, if it's a good one, I'm most likely going to get some sort of hit, right? Some sort of failure against that campaign. And that's where I think we need to do a little bit more. And what I talked about with instructor-led training is, you know, that provides a lot more scope into helping understand where the users are actually at in terms of their awareness. But it creates the opportunity where we can actually get in front of the wider audience within a particular client, including their C-suite or their executive levels, to make sure that they have the ability to identify in a live scenario where their user actually at, rather than trying to run through a report, which can be manipulated. So using that instructor-led courses is something that I recommend, and this is something that was coached to me by mentors of mine in the past. It can be a lot more effective just to be able to have that additional security conversation with the executives, because you're getting them in front of the action and actually seeing firsthand where their potential risks lie. What that can also do is create additional opportunities. I spoke that if a company has a board, invite those board members into that same type of environment. In many cases, that creates additional lead gen, because those board members are typically board members for other companies as well. So that gives you the ability to, have a greater reach. Maybe look at net new companies that you otherwise haven't had the opportunity to open up before. So there's a number of reasons why you can go down that path.
And that's one opportunity that could create high value engagements. But if we take it back and think around the sort of baseline activities that you were outlining, and what we might want to do for our stage two in rolling out further technical controls, a lot of partners are struggling with where to get started, what they should be having in their security solution. And you'll notice, everyone, I'm not calling it a stack, because one thing that I spoke about at the roadshows quite a lot is we're pricing up our stacks without labor, and we're not taking into account all the effort that we need to do in actually managing security and managing compliance. And it's going to come back to bite us. So when we're looking at our solutions, you mentioned frameworks a few times, but what sort of things are we typically looking at for that baseline, that sort of slightly advanced beginner level that most small businesses are going to engage with at the moment and spend money on? What are we covering in this security solution?
Yeah, great question. And I think depending on who you speak to, that's going to have a different answer. But from my perspective, I talked about preventative measures quite a bit, right? So if I was looking at what I deliver as part of my baseline, again, it's going to be those key things: your EMFA, your password managers, backup and EDR or EPP sort of comes into that framework. A lot of the partners are doing that already. But what a lot of them don't utilize is some of the functionality that already exists, right? If you're using Microsoft Business Premium as an example, a lot of the Microsoft security components become available through that. Being able to use things like autopilot combined with Intune or Endpoint Manager, as it's now called, can have the ability to then create that identity layer, right? So you can make sure that your first, moving into that sort of zero trust framework, first identifying should you be a part of the organization, and then using that conditional access that's available throughout as well to then determine what you can and can't do within that environment. So all these little things that are available with a lot of partners who standardize on Business Premium today, they aren't taking advantage of. They're relying on third-party solutions. In many cases, you may get to a point where a third-party solution makes more sense, right? But at that point, right, you still need to start somewhere. There's additional costs that obviously come with utilizing a third-party solution. So why not take advantage of what's available to you now with the functionality that's available through the tools you have today?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's something I think I'm seeing time and time again. People are getting stuck in analysis paralysis at the moment. They really taking so long to sort of get that perfect stack, rather than going, what can we actually action that are going to improve our client environments, and what can we do on a project basis, what makes sense on an easy recurring basis, and like you just said, what have we already got that we should just set up properly to reduce risk. And this is why we're talking about solutions, not a stack, because the problem is that I see is the stack isn't going to stay static. The threats are changing. What we need to do and focus on is going to change over time. And you spoke quite a lot about that sort of taking your clients on a journey. And I've noticed you aren't mentioning SOC and SIEM services in everything that we're talking about. But that's why I hear a lot from the partners. So why aren't you mentioning things like SOC and SIEM?
Yeah, well, when I focus on baselines, SIM services generally aren't something that partners usually focusing on, especially when they're sort of getting started in their journey or sort of looking at sort of branching that out. I think down the track it will become more important, particularly as regulation changes and there's a requirement around auditing and things like that. We're not quite there yet, but there is probably opportunity once you're at that step to get ahead of that game for when the government decide to implement those types of regulations, particularly as it's looking more and more like we're going to sort of have some sort of GDPR style regulation or enforcement coming through. But there's a lot of other things we can do as part of that. EDR, MDR, as you said, or SOC services. That could be potentially something you can add in, particularly if you don't have the necessary knowledge, capabilities, resources, and even experience under your belt to sort of tap into. You know, partners I've spoke to have a lot of them have considered it. They just don't know how to articulate the sort of value add to that. Maybe because of the conversations they're having with clients and don't want to pay additional services to them. But in many cases, it's just weighing out. It's just passing on the legwork to someone else on the back end who's got more experience. And in many cases, that'll probably provide more value add than if you try to do it in-house with your own resources that you had. So it really depends on where you are within your journey and how you want to jump into that. A lot of vendors are talking about the MDR services now. A lot of vendors we have on our line card as well have introduced that or are introducing some form of MDR in the future. And that seems to be the key thing they're focused on at the moment. But I think the first thing we need to do is make sure that the partners understand it, understand the value, and know how to sort of build that out as part of a security strategy.
I'm a bit dumb. What does EDR, MDR, and XDR actually mean? And what is the difference?
I know you're not that dumb, but no, great question. I think there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace, and every vendor unfortunately has their own sort of take on what all of those things are. But from my mind, there's a few ways to easily distill this down to something that's sensible that all partners can probably take away. Right? EPP is generally your traditional AV. Right? They are things that look for signature-based attacks. So that's something that has been discovered before, held in a database somewhere that they can tap into, right? Something that is a known process, something that is known for that technology to identify, right? EDR sort of takes it a next step beyond that signature-based attacks. In some instances, it's called next-gen AV or next-gen EBB. But EDR effectively adds two things to it: is the ability to identify behavioral elements to it. Right. The example I generally use when you're looking for behavioral type incidents is if you go through and open up an email and click on an attachment within an email, if that attachment starts kicking off processes that is considered abnormal behavior, such as a Word document that kicks off a PowerShell scripts, well, that's abnormal. So those are the type of behavioral elements it's looking for. Things that it's not known, it's not a known behavior that particular process or that particular application should be running. Right. The second thing it adds in is the ability to do true incident response. That is the ability to potentially remediate and recover from something like a malware or ransomware attack, right? So that is potentially being able to change or revert any changes that occur as part of an incident, revert that back to a pre-incident state, right? MDR takes that next level, which is manage, detect, and respond, which is effectively offloading the work, the management of incidents, and the response capabilities to an offsite SOC, right? It's effectively a managed SOC for your EDR or your endpoint detect and response, so that they can do that 24/7. So for a lot of partners who don't have a true 24/7 service, well, in many cases that can provide additional value because MDR is truly 24/7. So if something occurs at midnight when your entire team's asleep, you know that you've got that peace of mind in the back end that someone's looking into it, someone is responding on the back end to those particular types of insecurity incidents. And then the final piece of that is the next evolution of EDR or endpoint protection is XDR, which is stands for extended detect and respond, which is just looking at everything beyond the endpoint, right? So EDR is focused just on the endpoint, so your workstations, your servers. XDR is looking for other sources beyond that, right? And that's where there is a confusion on how XDR and SIM work as part of a solution, because effectively they do the same thing. They both ingest logs or information from other security servers like your email security platforms, your firewall platforms, things like that, and then correlating that information to understand what I need to do next as part of a remediation step. The difference between SIM and XDR specifically, though, is SIM only correlates that and provides you with a plan of action that someone needs to go through and manually undertake, right? A technician, a security officer within the partner environment. The XDR, if they can get it right, and when they do get it right, has the ability to automate a lot of that response. So it can send commands back to a firewall, for example, to do something as part of an incident response case. So that's where, if I was to distill those in simplest terms, that's what you'll be looking for as part of those different categories. And I think a lot of partners, get told different things from different areas across the internet, and it does get confusing sometimes. So if I was to distill it down, those are the ways I would summarize it.
I feel a lot smarter now. It's feel it is part of that challenge of us building security solutions. Is there is a lot of that marketing jargon going around that just creates so much more ambiguity. So filling those holes of what we need to provide for our clients becomes very difficult. And I do see partners struggling with, do I go EDR, MDR, XDR without even understanding what the difference is for them to be able to make a decision. So I think it's very valuable information that a lot of people skim over and don't give enough credit to partners about. So I've got another question for you. Take it along these lines of building out our security solution. You touched on things like identity management through M365 and Business Premium, and you've mentioned the EDR and MDR and XDR and all the other Rs. What what areas do you think partners aren't seeing in cybersecurity because maybe they're coming from a traditional background where it's been very infrastructure heavy and very specific ways that we've done it in the past? What sort of things are you seeing that partners should go have a look at and decide whether it's a fit for them or not?
Um, yeah, when I again, I'm going to go back to what I've been mentioning about preventative security. So, if I was to look at something that is going to reduce the most risk in an organization for my clients, I'll be looking at things that's going to stop the threat act. So, things like email security is one of the I think the most important pieces there, because when we look at the stats, 90% of all security incidents come through email. When we look at where a lot of breaches occur, they occur through browsers, and that's where web security solution like some sort of DNS filtering or DNS security solution comes into play. So those are going to be the two things that's going to drastically reduce your risk. But standardizing with things like MFA and password managers, right? And then some of the newer things that are coming up in conversations a lot more these days is things like zero trust, right? Zero trust is a fairly broad term, but those are things where we want to be able to identify again through that identity layer, right? Are you someone that should be part of my organization? And if so, what should you have access to, right? Basically authenticating that person and making sure that they are actually an employee of that company or should have access to particular content. That leads on to the SASE, the SASE type solutions, secure access, secure edge, because the networks are no longer hidden behind a firewall, right? They're anywhere and everywhere. So by being able to put some sort of additional sort of broader network in place where we're not just relying on firewalls to do that traffic, we're actually looking beyond that and saying, all right, well, I've got users that work from home, I've got users that travel quite a bit and they can check in from any Wi-Fi location. Those are the aspects I need to now look at in terms of adding preventative measures in place. And I can't rely on a firewall for someone who's not going to use a firewall to tap into my infrastructure. So it's changed now with that modern workplace in terms of where our strategy should be, and that's where all these that's where I focus in more of the preventative measures. When it's a nice to have all these recovery efforts that you have using some sort of backup and endpoint detection and all of those other tools that would sit on the back end.
You mentioned very early on in this piece around like the first CIS controls with inventory. Is that something that you're seeing a lot of partners focus on and knowing what they need to secure? Is that something that gets fallen out of this thought process when we're developing a security solution, or do you think partners have got this stuff covered and we can tick those boxes off?
I think a lot of partners think they've got it covered, because that's expanded now. So generally when partners focus on assets, they're looking at what endpoints are out there, what infrastructure is out there. A lot of them probably have that down pat. They might have a spreadsheet somewhere on how they're managing that. Um, through certain RMMs and vulnerability management tools, they can identify what applications are on those particular devices as well. But when we look at the broader terms and realize that there's a lot of applications that are outside of those endpoints that we don't necessarily have visibility into, such as if you're using something like Zero it's purely cloud, it's a purely SaaS-based technology. That's not something you're going to be that's discoverable through an endpoint. So those are things that a lot of those cloud-based environments where we now tap into are done through the browser, and that's why things like DNS security become more important. But we can have or put in some strategies in place to sort of lock that down a bit and understand, what those assets are by doing a proper business review, sitting down with the client and actually ascertaining, all right, what else do you use inside of your business that you may not have advised upon? That may be some entry point if those were compromised, right, or had some sort of vulnerability. Is that something from a supply chain perspective that that a bad actor could utilize to get inside my network and expose me to some sort of data breach?
Sounds like it's a lot of work and should cost a lot of money. Um, do we just give it away for free, or should we be looking at when we're doing these security solutions in tying more into advice in these ongoing engagements? Do you see many partners doing that?
I think partners generally like to give away things for free just to sort of get clients on board. I generally discourage that only because I think it does a disservice to the industry and disservice to the value that they're bringing. At the end of the day, partners are trying to be that trusted advisor. And if they're giving away for free, generally the client, just from a psychological point of view, won't take that. They might park it somewhere and read it on a later day stage if they've got a free report or a free security assessment or whatever you want to call it. That's where I do recommend charging for those type of situations because the one thing that'll come out of it is because they're paying for it, they've actually got to do something with it, and hopefully they sit down with a conversation with you. If I was to use an analogy, if you went to a doctor, they're always going to charge you for that service, right? Just to get that initial assessment, right? What are your symptoms, right? Here's the next steps to it. I don't think partners put enough value on the experience that they've had, right, to do things properly. And I think we all need to start jumping in on that and working together to make sure that we're billing appropriately and making sure the value and the experience that we've all had over the years, is understood by those clients. Right? And in many cases, if they fight you on it, if there's objections that constantly push back, I've spoken many times, and that may be the case where that client is probably just not a good fit for you, right? And you should move on to the next one that will buy into what you're trying to sell them, or buy into what you're trying to do, and that is to prevent and reduce their security risk at the end of the day.
I think that's some great advice, and you just touched on the medical concept of the experience we've got, and you go to a GP and you get that sort of assessment, and then you get it sent to a specialist. Us as MSPs, especially, have always been that generalist, and we've always thought we need to do absolutely everything for our client. But you already touched on the MDR as getting an outside party to put their specialty into our business and take some load off us. And as we're running very lean, don't have enough people, running very very thin on the ground, and as wages are going up and up, it's an opportunity there to view things in a different way. So one of the points that I'd make as well is like MDR is a good option, especially for the um, smaller MSPs and technology providers. But also, you've mentioned a lot around securing your own house, and very few people I've come across have got anyone watching their stuff. Gonna throw you a hand grenade. Um, what do you reckon? MSP safe? Are they the smallest risk profile for their clients? What does it look like?
No, that'd probably be the largest risk profile when we look at common supply chain attacks. When we look at what an MSP generally has access to within their client environments through their remote tools, through their RMM, and through some of the information they got access to. Their CSP licensing, as an example, they're probably at most risk, right? If I was a bad actor today, right, I have a better chance of going in and attacking the MSP, and once I got access to their environments, I've got access to dozens, if not hundreds, of clients, depending on how big the MSP is, versus attacking a client on a singular basis. So that's where the risk grows substantially from an MSP perspective. And you're right, in many cases they should be protecting their own house. In the term "eat your own dog food" comes up a lot. That is something a lot of partners should be doing and standardizing, what they're promoting and recommending to their clients to be actually doing themselves. But I want to expand that a little bit. There are some, the risk that partners see, right, are also going to be different to what your clients see. So there's almost the need for additional security layers or additional controls and control access that needs to be put in place, particularly for a growing MSP that has different roles and different levels of experience that need to be injected as part of that. Your level one tech versus your managing director should not have the same level of access, right? Because there's just a different level of experience within that. So there's a lot more that needs to be put in place from an MSP in their own practice. But the security, is just if not even more important than what they should be delivering on their client side.
fantastic advice, and I know we could keep talking about this for ages and ages, and we're coming up to time. I've already got some takeaways. I know we're being very particular around our making sure people have next steps. So I've taken away from today. If we don't have a security solution yet, start with that baseline of what are you doing already, and what are some logical additions to get started. Leverage what you've got. If you've got 365 as a major environment, well, look at upgrading to business premium and start leveraging that more, and then start understanding your client risk profiles properly and understanding the risks and the regulations and the technology for now and into the future to do that sort of stage two security solution. What do you want to leave everyone? What's your golden nugget to finish off? What's your final thought to leave with all the partners?
I think the main thing is, partners try to do this themselves and try to sort of weed through all the noise that's out there in the market. You don't have to do this alone. So that's where, here at Pax8, we've got a lot of people that you can speak to, and hopefully provide a bit more guidance. We have a lot of collateral that you can leverage. Just have a talk to us, and we can guide you through those next steps, through that process. A framework's going to help, but understanding those frameworks is important too. And sometimes just speaking to someone, even if it's just your peers, understanding what they're doing in the market, what they're doing well, what works, what doesn't, that's going to go a long way into making sure that you're on the right track in your journey.
I think it's a fantastic thing to wrap up on. You don't have to be there doing it alone. It's not like when we first started our MSPs and we're flying blind. We've got a huge community and ecosystem, and there is a bunch of SMEs running around that can help you. And you're already flat out busy, let alone trying to deal with all this
Absolutely.
added noise. So, been awesome having you, Elliot. Look forward to getting you to jump on again in a few sessions, and we'll no doubt try and share some more insights for our partners. So thanks for that.
Thanks for having me, James.
Anytime. Until next time.